And I think we both feel pretty strongly that Saint Spiridon should figure prominently in the documentary. And I guess that would be my first question for you.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly should. It was the host to the first 3 folk dance festivals, and then I think since then, another at least 2, I think, where Saint Spiridon was the host, and then it's been in San Diego a couple other times after that. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. It'll be a little bit more difficult nowadays to find some of the people who were involved still with it back then, but they're definitely around. I think Peter's mentioned the name Marilyn Cremidas and her brother Bill Cremidas. Marilyn was on the original junior parish council for St. Spiridon that put together the first FDF. And her younger brother Bill was a long time dancer and still is, and he's danced for San Diego, Long Beach, number of different places. And, I mean, if we wanted to, we could get together and probably just rattle off a list of names of people who were around the dance program and early on from St. Spiridon and who, in some fashion or another, are still around, and we can get into contact with them, And if we told them we were doing this project, they'd probably be pretty interested in contributing, I would think.
Yeah.
It would be really cool, I think, to follow a couple of, a few storylines and get some different perspectives. Somebody who was, around and involved really early on, somebody, some of the younger kids who are involved today, and then what would be great is to find somebody who, was involved fairly early on, has kind of gone through the arc and now has kids, starting on, the same path or, have gone through that. So
does anyone like that come to mind?
Yeah, you could do George Pappengelling comes to mind. He's in Fresno, but he was at the very first FDF as a dancer, and he's been heavily involved with the dance program from the perspective of being a dancer. Then on the admin side, he's been the judge coordinator for the last decade or so, or maybe more, and he has 3 kids that were all involved in the program who have now all grown up. The youngest son of his is now kind of, God, how old is he now? He's in his early 20s, and so he's kind of gone all the way through the program as well. So that would certainly be somebody that just comes to mind off the top of my head. There are certainly some people here in San Diego. I'd have to think, but we'd have to ask Dad and Thanasi Nick, and they would have probably some better thoughts on who. But I'm thinking of some names and faces involved with the dance groups from a long time ago that have kids who are now dancing in the programs and things like that. So yeah.
Cool.
I'm trying to think of George came to mind because he was heavily involved, like I said, as a dancer on the administrative side of FDF, and his kids all danced. Elaine would be somebody interesting to talk to potentially from the early on standpoint. She danced, yeah, I guess she did dance early on, and then she was pretty heavily involved with the admin side of it, but really kind of was out of it by the early 90s, So yes, she might be somebody interesting to talk to from getting the perspective of very early on, but her involvement really only goes maybe about halfway through the life of FDF. Yeah, I mean, I think everybody you talk to is going to have stories and thoughts and memories and things like this, but at least a couple come to mind. Certainly the very first FDF that we ever went to, and I'm trying to think of which one it was. If the first FDF was held in 76 and the second FDF was held in 78, it might have been like 70, it was either 79 or 80 was the first FDF that I performed at. and it was the group, the youngest group that we had here at St. Spiridon, and we got to FDF, and it was nothing like it is now. I mean, there was obviously much fewer groups. It was a much smaller thing, and we were the youngest group that had ever showed up to an FDF, and they really didn't know what to do with us or what, where to put us. So they were just kind of like, okay, I guess, you guys just do your thing. But so that was kind of a very unique thing. People were like, wow, like even little kids can do that. Now it's, you go and you see, 3 and 4 year olds out there doing their thing, and it's, it's totally common. But back then, it was, we were probably, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years old, and there was a group of maybe 15 or so of us, and it was really kind of like, there's nobody here like that are the same age as these kids competing, And so, yeah. And one memory in particular sticks out, and the group ranged in age. So maybe I would have been one of the younger ones at probably somewhere in the 5 to 7 range, and then I think we had some kids that were maybe 10 or 11 years old. But we were standing there waiting for our to perform, and we were standing there. And this is back in the day when we were all wearing just white button-up shirts, black slacks, black loafers or shoes, and we all had little Greek vendor hats, and then we all had like these red vests that were just made out of this terrible, old like felt, super cheesy, terrible material, and it just had like a gold border stitched around, and the gold border was just the weaved gold, yarn that that somebody just stitched on there. It was just, the cheapest, most hilarious thing looking back now, and the quality of what gets produced at FDF today, it was quite comical. But so we're all just standing on stage waiting for that, and they had some issue with the music, and so we were waiting and waiting and waiting for it to start, and we're doing this thing where you're standing and everybody's in an arm hold, and we're in a nice half circle, and we're waiting for so long finally, and the leader of the line, his name was Scott Jackson, right? Yeah, Scott Jackson, I remember that, and he looked down and his shoe was untied, and so you're on stage, you're supposed to be, perfect and whatever and getting ready to perform, right? And so it was taking so long for them to start the music, he just kind of real quietly just kneeled down, just tied his shoe, then he just stood back up, and everybody's like, are we going to get marked down for that? Well, and so it was very funny, but ended up being a great experience. And we won a medal that year, and I want to say it was a silver medal. I'm like 95% sure it was a silver medal, and so it was a big thing. We were young, and we won this medal, and it was unique, and kind of, I think, opened the door for a lot of people to say, hey, we can do this with young kids everywhere and at our communities as well. So, early on it was just you'd come and you'd do a bunch of dances that your director knew, and they could be from all over the place, just kind of whatever. And as FDF evolved and kids started getting more advanced in what they were doing, and as people were looking to expand and branch out, to do something that was different than what everybody else was doing, they started doing shows that were then regionally based, or where you'd have a suite of dances that were all from a particular island or a particular region in Greece. And so that's really now the norm today. You'd be pretty hard pressed to find somebody that just came and put together a set of dances that were from disparate parts of the country. So that was a big change, and that, I don't know, it took maybe 7 to 10 years or so for people to really hone in on that. And so then it became a very popular and commonplace thing for directors to then, during the summer times, or the off season, if you will, to go to Greece and go to a particular region where they wanted to research dances from, and they would learn all about the dances and the things from that region. And then they'd come back and they'd say, okay, this is going to be our new set for this year, is we're going to do dances all from this region. And then naturally what flowed along with that was the evolution of costuming, because then as you started doing costumes from a particular region, you could get very specific and very detailed with the kind of costuming that you were doing, so that you would actually look the part of the dances and the things that you were doing. So it was, I think, a natural evolution, but it didn't start that way. So I think it certainly made it easier to look at and judge something as a whole, because then you didn't have the issue of, you weren't trying to switch styles, because the styles tend to be very specific from region to region, and so you could perform a whole set in a style and get very good at performing a particular style. And there have been groups over the years at FDF that they became very well known, for this is what this church does well. These guys really do, Pontic well, or these guys really do Cretan well, and that's kind of their thing. And then the really fun thing, even as the next evolution from there, is seeing those groups that would always come and do Cretan. They always kind of came and did Cretan dances. Then you see them come and do a set from a totally different region of Greece, and you go, wow, like, good for them. They're learning, they're branching out, they're doing something new, and so that's also a very cool sort of evolution of the whole process. Yeah, I mean, if I had to pick, my two favorites would be dances from the region of Pontus, Pontian dances, just because the Pontians were very manly men type people, and they were big time warriors, and they were tough, and they were, so their costumes were always very fun to wear because they were, black, and they were, pants, and they were boots, and you got to usually adorn it with some kinds of guns and knives and things like that, and whatever. And so, when you're young and you're performing, it's always fun to have that kind of stuff with the costuming. And I don't want to say their dances are rigid, because that's not the right word for it, but they have a very specific style. They were very deliberate in what they did, but their dances tended to have a lot of energy. So that would be one of my two. My other favorite probably would be Thracian, dances from the region of Thrace. And just because similar kind of thing, different style, but very, very festive dances that tended to be fast, a lot of moving lines, and a lot of just fun interaction. So that's my preference. We actually did Macedonian suites several times, and so I grew up doing a lot of Macedonian dances, and I liked it quite a bit. I'd probably put it somewhere between. It's not quite as stern and energetic as Pontic dances tend to be on the whole. There certainly are some that can be, but on the whole, probably one notch down from Thracian and Pontic dances, I would say. So I tended to like the faster, more upbeat, fun stuff that, when you go to dance practice and you finish, you're like sweating and you're thinking, wow, that was fun, and I got to work out and whatever.
Yeah. I mean, are the bulk of them group dances, or?
Most of them tend to be group dances, just because that's kind of the nature of Greek dancing, I think. But there's certainly some of the regions, and Cretan comes to mind, where you can have a group of people doing a dance, but then there would be these fantastic solo opportunities where a dancer or a couple of dancers would come out and do some very unique, special things. And I don't want to say like a show-off thing, but a showcase piece, if you will.
Like an exclamation point or
yeah, yeah, and kind of the nature of Greek dancing is that typically, if you're at the front or the back of the line, sometimes you have that opportunity to add a little bit of extra flair and a little bit of style to some of the things. And so again, depends on what region you're at, where you are. Sometimes you can lead from the back of the line in terms of some of the things that you're doing. But for the most part, they tend to be group dances. The islands end up with a lot of like couples dances and things that tend to be a little bit more artistic or ornate, a little bit flowier, a little bit slower, things like that. And then there's definitely examples of where I wouldn't call them solo dances, but there would be dances that reenact a certain thing, like a fight between two guys, or the old man dance comes to mind. And see, it just goes to show you, growing up, how we always knew it as the old man dance, but there was this one dance where there's an old man, and he's very decrepit and old, and he barely dances. The dance itself goes back and forth from a fast celebratory thing to then a very slow step, and he joins them when they're doing the slow step because it's all he can do, and then he kind of falls by the wayside as they do the fast thing, and then there's different versions of that. Some were more theatrical than others early on, but you'd have like the popular one early on before the dancing got a lot more authentic was that the old man would make this miraculous recovery and do the fast part with them, at the end of the dance, and so it was kind of funny, but yeah.
And in terms of the music, is like that? Is there a particular music from a particular region that you?
That's probably a really good question also. I don't know that I've ever really thought, like, this is my favorite music, because I've always thought of music and the dance being so intimately tied together.
That's a good point.
But I do, I guess if I had to pick, I'd say probably the music from the region of Pontus. They've got a couple of instruments that I just, that they're not necessarily exclusive to Pontian dances, but I think they make great use of the lira, which is kind of like it's almost like a little violin, but you hold the neck of it and it sits on the musician's knee, and he plays it in front of him back and forth that way. A gaita, which is basically a Greek bagpipe, but it's got one drone instead of three. And then the Pontic musicians have a fantastic drum, and it's called brain drain. I don't even remember, but it'll come to me maybe. But they've got this great round drum, which the drummer wears just on a strap, and it just hangs down in front of him. But he bangs on it with the one side of the stick, and then, or his whatever you'd call it, your drumstick, I guess. And on the back side, he's got basically a very thin little stick, which just sits, and he holds it pressure on it on the backside, and he can do kind of like a snare rattle almost with it on the backside, and every time he hits, it'll rattle that as well. And so just, you can get some really great bass line and fun stuff going, and you can get a group going very rapidly and get you quite pumped up. So yeah. Tony's, I don't think I've ever heard any of Tony's, but I've seen lots of recordings. Again, kind of like I mentioned before, it became a very commonplace thing, especially for some of the older groups that were starting to get very serious about their presentation and education of Greek dancing, where the very dedicated directors would go to Greece every summer, and they would go to a particular region and they would videotape everything, they would take notes, they would, whatever. And a lot of these kids, they were going to Greece every year anyways to visit family and friends and things like that. And then as they got older and more into dance and things like that, it became, I'm going to Greece, but for this, few days, I'm going to this part of Greece because we're gonna, go learn whatever. And they'd make arrangements to stay with people, and they'd talk to people ahead of time, and it was like a whole thing that people would be thrilled that you're coming here to learn about our dances, and so yeah. Starting in, I think it was 1991 when FDF was in LA. Was it 91? Yeah, 91 in LA. The evolution was, when it first started, it was sponsored, or it was hosted by a church. So St. Spiridon hosted, like I said, the first 3 FDFs, and then the next one was hosted by St. George's, I think, in Fresno, and so for the first several years, it was, there was always a sponsored church, and the logic there was that you needed people to be involved and people to help run it, and you needed a facility, because for the first many years that it was, at the church. And shortly thereafter it grew to be, where I think we rented out one of the local, like the Scottish Rite Temple hall down there in Mission Valley, and so that's where then the performing, would happen. But so you needed some facility and some people, so it was kind of logical that a church would be involved. And then they would in fact then split the proceeds, I think, 50-50 each year, half going to the church and half going to the Folk Dance Festival for production of the next year's event. Anytime you do that, there's always, the possibility for there to be some confusion or some thought about, well, what we thought was really income, or what, we think we deserve more because we did all this work, whatever. So in 1991, FDF went the route of having a genuine management team, and keeping in with tradition of the original group that put the Folk Dance Festival on. It was a youth group of kids that all came together from all over the diocese at the time, or the metropolis, and they were each assigned a certain aspect of the production of the event, and they would meet periodically and have planning meetings and do their stuff, and then come the event, they put it on, and then it was its own individual thing. So there wasn't a sponsoring parish that was attached to it from that point forward, and that's how it's been ever since. Obviously, wherever it's held regionally, the church or churches that are around it tend to be very heavily involved in terms of their personnel and things like that, just because it's geographically desirable and it's easy. But so they've for the most part, even through today, maintained the management team structure. And so the whole goal of the management team was that, not only is this a great cultural event for the kids and things like that, but that it could be a learning experience. And so that was Dad's original ideal and dream for what it would be, is that it would be a leadership training program as well as this cultural preservation and religious and spiritual indoctrination type of program. And so I think, by any measure, it succeeded wildly in that respect in terms of the number of people's lives that it touched over the years who were involved with management teams, who had the opportunity to be involved in the administration of the event. And so going back to your original question, what was my involvement with it? As far back as 91, so Thanasi, my oldest brother, was the managing director that year, and so he got to select, for the most part, a management team of kids. And so I think there was like 20 some odd of us, maybe 20, 25 of us that first year. And everybody had a role. And I was the opening and closing, opening ceremonies and award ceremonies coordinator, I think, that first year or whatever. And so I would have been 17 at the time. And I don't remember what my budget was individually for my, particular events, but it was substantial. I think the overall budget back then was something like $400,000 or something, and rapidly growing. So I was lucky enough to be involved from 91 on a number of different management teams. And then in 1998, I had the opportunity to be the managing director myself. And at that point, I think our budget then was like 600,000 or 650, somewhere in that range. So after that, the way we did it back then was, I think the managing director from the previous year then would have the opportunity to sit on the board of directors. And so when FDF moved away from having a host parish, it still needed some sort of formalized governing body, if you will, to administer it on the 12-month cycle beyond just each new management team that would come in. And so they created their board of directors. I think they called it the board of trustees, maybe. And so it was comprised of a number of senior FDF people who had been around and been heavily involved with it from a long time ago and whatever. And so I had the opportunity to be on the board of trustees, and then had the opportunity to stay on the board of trustees and continue to be involved and work with management teams going all the way through 2000, whenever we finished our involvement. I think it was like 2008-ish, somewhere in that range. I don't remember the exact date. So for another 10 years. So all in all, I think I was involved on the administrative production side of the festival for like 18 years, something like that. So it's always been supervised by adults, obviously. But really through our involvement, through at least I think whatever the time frame was, 2008, we really tried to let each new management team be their own body that decided on their own logo, their own sort of marketing stuff, how they were gonna put on certain events and things like that. Now, it's not rocket science, and we weren't reinventing the wheel every year. Each festival looked the same, and that was on purpose because we'd found a formula that worked, and we'd proven that it worked. So we didn't deviate too far from that. But certainly everybody had, each management team had the ability to decide, on the themes of their events and use, different vendors that they, liked or would vet or things like that. And With a few critical exceptions, kind of everything was open for debate each year. So, and only until recently, and I think they still have a management team, but I think it's populated mostly by kids in their 20s and 30s now. So it's still younger adults involved in it, but you don't have any more 15-year-olds on the management team like you used to, things like that. So to really put that amount of faith and responsibility into the hands of some very young people, teenagers and young 20-somethings, takes a significant amount of time to help them, coach them, and watch them without being overbearing, so that they don't make terrible mistakes, but so that they do the work, the actual project, get the benefits out of it, and the reward for what they're doing. And it's risky stuff. That would be kind of the biggest thing that I think is what I'm getting at is that Peter was willing to do that, and because again, that was always his dream. He's always loved working with young adults. They tend to be less complicated than adults, and so there's certainly some upsides to it. But he was very engaged in that process, and he was always willing to be sort of the buffer that would answer to either the hierarch at the time or to the board of trustees or to whoever that we're going to let them do this, or this is going to be okay. And so a little bit unfortunate, and I wouldn't downtrod at all on what's going on today. I think they've done a great job of maintaining the program, which I think is critical. But I think some of the training and youth leadership aspect of it has gone by the wayside, and I think probably just because it's risky, and I think you don't have the current metropolitan and priests and things like that. They tend to be much more conservative, and so it's harder for them to sort of let that go, or let a 15-year-old run with a $75,000 budget and things like that. So so that's why I think some of that stuff has gone away. And I think that as far as the management teams went, it wasn't a totally new group of kids every year. Typically you'd have some sort of recycle. There'd be anywhere from maybe 25 to 50% of the kids on any management team had been on the previous year's management team. And again, also by design, as maybe you'd have a role in your initial years that was a little bit of a less critical impact role, and then maybe the next couple of years you'd graduate to some of the bigger and bigger events and things of that nature, or you'd have the opportunity to do the same thing again and do it better or differently than you did it the year before. And so there was kind of that happened a lot in two different ways. So I think that whole leadership idea touched a lot of people's lives. A lot of the people that are still involved with it today were involved with management teams back then. So I think it's fantastic, and it's one of those things that once you get involved with it, it is so much fun and it is so rewarding. You want to keep doing it again. So it's also hard to say, okay, I'm out because we'll make room for other people. And I'll be the first to admit it. I was lucky, very lucky, just by some association and being a part of this family, and I didn't really have a choice. I was just had to be involved with it. But I loved it. I never regretted it, ever. And so I got to be involved with it, every year in and year out, at a very high level or a very involved level. And so I think when people do that, it gets in you and you want to keep doing it. And so I think that's kind of where it's gotten today, is that there's a group of people that are into it and running it and enjoying it, and not thinking about it so much as a youth training, leadership development thing anymore. So,
I just wanted to ask, as far as the management team, was that, who selected the management team every year? Was it other managers or?
Yeah, so it was usually a combination of the board of trustees and the managing director. So,
Okay.
and it varied a little bit from year to year, but typically we tried to have some sort of application process so that kids, from all over the place could submit an application and get letters of recommendation, things like that. And then not every year, but in some years we tried to do interviews with everybody, and all part of the process by design is that you wanted even the kids that didn't get selected to have the experience of going through. I've applied for something. I had to do a phone interview. I had to get a letter of recommendation and things like that. And so there was certainly some collateral benefit for kids that never even ended up being on a management team. But yeah, it was usually selected by some selection committee, which was comprised of board of trustees members and the managing director for that year and probably the previous one. Yeah. Well, I mean, we had some all-star people who they were just animals that they would, they were, 100%, everything that they were doing, they were involved with school, with management team, with dancing, with directing, and so there was definitely some people who were unbelievable in that respect. Me personally, I spent a fair bit of time, again, just on the administrative side of it, and again, I kind of count myself as being very lucky because when I was on the board of trustees, then moving forward, I was old enough that I could be a little bit of a mentor. Nah, that's probably too generous of a word. I was old enough that the rest of the board of trustees could say, okay, well, here you can manage some of what they're doing and help them out and whatever. And I was young enough to still want to do it, whereas where some of the other board of trustees members were like, we don't want to go to these weekend meetings once a month and stuff like that. And I was like, great, let's go. So I think that I just happened to fall at a very lucky time in my life and my involvement with the evolution of FDF that was really a fantastic experience in my life.
Cool. Were you a good dancer?
I was amazing. No, I'm just kidding. I was a decent dancer.
Our next is going to be asking for demos.
Yeah, well, it's been a long time. I was a fair dancer. I was a pretty decent dancer. I think I got the benefit of the doubt a little bit because my two older brothers danced in an older dance group, and then just sort of out of necessity, I ended up dancing up a group a little bit older than I should have been, just because so my mom, I think, didn't have to keep driving down to church and back for different dance practices and things like that. So I got the opportunity to dance with older kids than me for the last several years of my dancing career, which was a lot of fun. Yeah. If I had to bet my life that I would have met my wife at FDF and married a Greek girl, I would have bet my life in a heartbeat. I'd have been like, for sure, absolutely, And I ended up not. I ended up meeting the love of my life at a friend's wedding, at a fraternity brother's wedding, actually, and. My parents have always been very progressive, not progressive, but just very understanding, and more than anything, they want me and my brothers to just be happy and successful. Mm-hmm. And so when they, see and understand that certain things make us happy and that certain things, again, are just right, then they're very supportive of it and always have been. And to her credit, the other side of that is that my wife was super supportive of my involvement with FDF, because I certainly met her when we were still heavily involved with FDF, and so she had been to FDF a couple of times, and so she's gotten to see behind the curtain and see what all the craziness is all about and whatnot, and so she's been very supportive and understanding of it from her side as well, and understands what it has meant to me in my life and how it helped shape who I was. Yeah. On a personal note, I have this theory that I am like the luckiest guy around, right? That I've lived this incredibly charmed life, and FDF obviously plays a huge role, and I just think that my opportunity to be involved with it, when I was involved with it, during the growth of it, I remember it being a small thing. I remember it being little. It was always over not always, but after the first year, it was always over President's Day weekend, and my birthday is the week before. And so I remember being a little kid, and when it was small enough, when there was one of the critical people in the early years in the production of it, Don and Ellie Hyatt, you've heard us talk about them, and Don and I shared the same birthday on February 7th, a week before. And so at the awards banquet, which really wasn't much of an awards banquet, unlike what you would have seen this year at FDF, they would bring Don and I up on stage and sing. Everybody would sing "Happy Birthday" to us, So we're talking, very small, thing back then. And so I still.
When you're a little kid.
Yeah, well, yeah. Obviously it's a lot of fun when you're a little kid. But I remember it being, still. I remember FDF distinctly, even though I was very young. I remember it when it was like that, and to have had the opportunity to be a part of it through the entire growth and arc of it, seeing it get to where it is today, and getting to be involved in the actual development of that, getting to where it is today, I think is just another one of the many things in my life that I count as being one of the luckiest guys and leading a very charmed life, just by nature of being in the right place at the right time sometimes. And so it was interesting, and just talking to a lot of people, everybody said, wow, this was kind of like a huge reunion year. There's all these people that hadn't been around in a while happened to just come this year, and so it's a lot of people that we hadn't seen in a long time, just because I'd been absent, but also because they had been absent, and so just sort of randomly, it was just a good year. I think the timing was right, and the location was relatively convenient. Excuse me. So it ended up being an interesting year. So we saw and talked to a lot of people. That was a lot of fun. And then I think I admit I am duly impressed with what they're doing with the festival in certain aspects. I think it's great. I think the whole growth and evolution with technology, as that's gotten to where it is, the whole connectivity to social media, and especially with the demographic today that uses that, and that is your typical dancer at FDF. It's awesome. I think it's absolutely fantastic. So I think that as much as some things have gone away from the program, there are other things that now exist that didn't before, and I think it continues to move in the right direction, which is maintaining the cultural attachment, maintaining the spiritual attachment, and weaving those two intimately together, that they're trying to instill the ideal that they're not separate. They could be, but it's a lot more fun if they're not. Again, if you don't blow up the formula, and you don't try and reinvent the wheel every year, kids want to get together. They want to have a reason to come and see each other, meet each other, and they want to have something in common, And if everybody's there because they're all Greek dancing or singing or whatever it is, then you instantly have something in common. And just kind of as an example, when you're young and involved in the program, it's a competition, and so you hate everybody who's not in your own dance group, because you're like, they're the competition, right? And it's just very funny, but that's kind of your world, your mentality when you think of we're competing for an award when you're young, right? But as you start to get older and you become a teenager, and then certainly into your 20s and beyond, the relationships that open up the doors to relationships with other people and other communities and other groups, it like explodes and mushrooms into this huge, like, wow, I can have friends in groups that are competing in the same category as us, and I can have lots of friends, and we can have a great time, and at the end of the day, then I don't care nearly as much anymore. Of course, I'm going to work hard and I want to win a medal or whatever. That's why you're there. It's one of the main reasons. But the richness of the social, spiritual impact of the networking and the relationships that you make, you realize later as you get older how much more that far outweighs than just I danced and I got a medal, And when you realize how that you're forever connected because we both now understand our where we came from culturally so much deeper than maybe some other kids have the opportunity to, and so it's very funny. I distinctly remember going through that evolution and thinking like, wow, and when you come to FDF, so many years in a row, you see the same people and things like that. And so inevitably you're going to have opportunities to interact with those people and socialize with those people. And so you kind of go, okay, that guy wasn't so bad. He was kind of cool, And so then you see him again, you're kind of a little more friendly. And then you see him again, you're kind of a little more friendly. And, and then you laugh because you're like, man, I used to hate you because you were in the other dance group, I didn't know who you were. You were just in the other dance group and I hated you because you were competing against us, But now you're like totally buds and you can't wait to get to FDF again the next year to see each other. And, so yeah, totally. I don't know what they are anymore, but the statistics that we had going back in the mid 2000s would have been anywhere from 10 to 15,000 spectators over the course of the weekend and about 2,500 or so participants. So you got to figure the bulk of the difference between the 2,500 and the 10 to 15,000 is going to be family and friends that are mostly Greek, but definitely there was certainly a lot of interest, and depending on where it was locally and things like that, there would certainly be a lot of interest. We were in Ontario for a number of years, and it kind of became a staple of the Ontario scene for a few years there, and so there was a lot of kind of local interest, and people would come and buy day passes and kind of see what's going on, and so and I think also just in general, Greeks kind of have a good rap about being jolly, hosts and celebrants and partiers, and so people, so people go, oh, hey, there's a Greek festival going on. We're not doing anything, so let's go see what it's all about, And I think you get to FDF and you're kind of like, oh, this is a little bit more serious, like a competition and like a legitimate, setup thing, not so much a weekend festival like you get at maybe one of the local churches or something, but certainly there was definitely attendance by non-Greeks, yeah. And from year to year, they would try and do some things a little bit differently or have some more of that kind of activity. And you saw there was some booths and some things like that and some vendors and things. And they tried to add some of that over the years and with some success in terms of attracting additional people. But yeah, and it's kind of like I was saying, it's one, it's not, well, I don't know how. I was going to say we didn't really publicize it that much to say, hey, it's a festival, because it is much more of it's got a very specific purpose, a focus, and a group of people who are there for a reason, rather than to just kind of go hang out and listen to Greek music and whatever. But yeah, for the people who do show up, and wow, it is a very interesting thing. We definitely would get media coverage from year to year, and it makes for a great news story because there's lots of great footage, lots of great interviews and things like that, and you can kind of package it into a neat little thing, and it makes for a good, interest story on the news and things like that. So a little bit like we were talking about the other day, I'd love to see something that obviously celebrates the actual event for what it was and just the success that it's enjoyed over, 4 decades. So that in and of itself is a great story, but I would really love to see a film about FDF that's just sort of the center of the story, but the deeper essence of the film really gets at the heart of what this event has done at a level beyond just, hey, like every year there's this cool competition, and that gets more into the relationships, the preservation of the culture, the proliferance of the Greek culture being perpetuated here in America. Now you can find more kids between the ages of 5 and 30 that can Greek dance in the U.S. than you can in Greece. It's because it's not what they do over there. They're Greek and they are Greek, and it's just they don't think about having to preserve my Greek culture, my Greek heritage. They learn about it in history books and they're growing, so it's just kind of indoctrinated into them. But they're missing out on kind of this whole great thing that we've had over here, which, I don't know if it was by design or by accident, but now, there was just this opportunity that presented itself in the way of we've got this really rich culture and this rich history of dance and music and celebration that our kids really latched onto and liked. And so it has given a much deeper and much more meaningful tie to the cultural heritage for the Greeks in this country than they otherwise likely would have had, and then just the growth of the music side of it, the costuming side of it, the choral side of it. I think it's just really fantastic in terms of what that's done. So I think kind of for me it would be on three fronts. One, the actual event itself. Number two, the cultural preservation that it has spawned and continued to feed. And then number three would be very closely tied to that, but the social depth of the relationships amongst the Greek Orthodox communities, especially in the Western Diocese or the metropolis of San Francisco, but as a whole, and FDF, as we know it, gave birth to what now are several other folk dance festivals in other regional parts of the country for other metropolises, and then now you have groups who perform at those. They'll now cross pollinate, and some groups will say, well, hey, we're going to go to your FDF next year, and vice versa, and things like that. So just the broadening of the social horizon, if you will. That's a really inarticulate way to say that, but you get the idea of what I'm saying. I mean, just the depth of the relationships that have come about because of the folk dance festival that I can't see any other way that they would have if it wasn't for the folk dance festival. I mean, you literally have guys, and Eris would be a great one to talk to about this, because now he's he grew up in Downey, I think. Yeah, he grew up in Downey, and so he danced there. He went on to become a director. Then he danced for Long Beach. He became a judge. Now he lives on the East Coast, and he's been a judge at multiple different FDFs now. So at this one here in the West, and at I think 2 different ones in the East, and then and just the amount and number of people that he knows now because of his involvement with Greek dancing, it's just shocking, and you think, like, he'd be a great case study. You could do probably, if we had, if you have a version of 6 Degrees to Kevin Bacon in the Greek Orthodox Church, as far as folk dancing is concerned, it'd probably be Eris. It'd be like 6 Degrees to Eris, because like everybody knows Eris. He's somehow been involved in every function of it. He's been, like I said, involved in multiple different FDFs now, and as a director, and so and he's just one example. I mean, there's lots of people that are like that, and the thing that I think is really neat is the at least especially in the West, the relationship between the North and the South of California in particular, but just in general, the only time you'd ever get real interaction between those two things is maybe at like, some kind of a Goya basketball tournament or some kind of an AHEPA basketball tournament. And those really are very competition driven, and there isn't much of a spiritual side to those events. And they're just, they're fewer and far between. The impact is smaller and things like that. And so, now you've got kids that have become each other's kubati, or their best men or baptized kids, or best friends, or they've chosen to go to college somewhere where they know that they can Greek dance with a community or group that they've always really liked or that they've been close with, and you think, wow, like somebody might actually decide where they're going to go to college because based on, still being able to be attached to that or be close to, if you have the opportunity, you can say, okay, well, I'm going away from home, so where do I want to go? Well, I want to go where my friends are, and I've got friends now, not just here. I've got friends, I can decide to go where my friends are, For your average kid coming out of high school, when they decide to go to college, it's,
You're on your own.
you don't have the option to say, I'm picking, maybe you have family somewhere else, but you usually don't have like friends, somewhere else, or close friends that, so it's kind of an interesting thing, I think. But those would be the three fronts. The event itself, I think, just the fact that 30 some odd years, you'd be hard pressed to find any other or many other similar type functions or activities that have lasted that long. I think at one point we had done some analysis and talked to some experts, and they kind of said, like 10 to 15 years is sort of the lifespan for an event or a function like this. And so, long since shot past that, which is fantastic. So the event itself, the preservation and the deepening of the cultural and spiritual connection of the Greek traditions and the Orthodox traditions, and then the social side of it, the connection of these kids and these people into much, much deeper and long-lasting parts of their lives than just, I went to FDF this year. You are sitting in FDF headquarters for the first 32 years or whatever it was of the event. Yeah, and so and it's kind of funny you mention that, because that's really a big reason for this project, and our involvement with you guys, is because we literally have a storage facility that is just chock full to, and this is a 30 by 15 storage unit, and it's just filled top to bottom, left to right, with old FDF stuff, and we kept not everything, but lots of everything, and this goes back to way before computers were prolific and used to manage and monitor all this stuff. Now it's great because everything related to FDF, you can just it's all digital. The production of the whole thing. But we're talking back, everything is on paper. The pictures that are actual, old slide photographs and things like that, and even some of the old original sweepstakes trophies we've got in storage and things like that. And so there's just a tremendous amount of history there, and it's it needs to have a story. Mm-hmm. It needs to come out and be told. And so
yeah, definitely.
So this was FDF headquarters for years. And we even had an 800 number that rang here. And it was a specific line, and so when it would ring, the girls would know, oh, we answer and we say, FDF helpline, can I help you?
That's funny.
Yeah.
That's amazing. It must have been really fun, sort of.
Oh yeah.
Growing up with.
Yeah, this was the
all
mailing
this
address for FDF, and like I said, it had the 800 number, and it was without a doubt for sure. It was always something to look forward to every year, and that wasn't just unique to me. I mean, every kid that goes to FDF, they can't wait to go again, and I mean, there's kids that they put a bracelet on everybody for registration, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's kids that try and keep their bracelet on until the next FDF, and it's sort of like a competition thing that to see if they can do it.
Wear the bracelet for the longest.
Yeah.
That's cute.
So I mean, but yeah, I like I said, just consider myself. I consider myself incredibly lucky because I just got to be very intimately involved with it year over year, and so just as a result of the fact that nobody else was dumb enough to keep doing it and keep being involved, but my parents were gracious enough or silly enough to to still be involved every year.
They were so involved, even your mom.
Oh yeah. It was a, and again, this goes back to when it was really just a small thing. It was a family deal. My mom helped run all of the scoring and did all the input for all of the the judges and all of that stuff. And my dad was obviously very heavily involved in the admin and the guidance and direction side of what he was doing. But yeah, there and that's their legacy too, which is a part of this. I think the story needs to be about FDF as a whole. I don't know that it's not like I don't think it should be a hey, here's an homage to my parents and what they did. I think the story would be incomplete if it didn't include certainly some insight into that. My dad put up the pink slip to his car one year to guarantee a very expensive rental for these big tents that we did one year, and it flooded that year, and we were thinking like, my dad, you can ask him about it, he'll tell you about it. It's very entertaining coming from him, but he was thinking like, I might be out of a car, after this weekend. Yeah, if these tents don't dry out and if they don't float away. So, yeah. So, but, I think it's kind of interesting. Just the other day, I had lunch with a good friend, and he recently finished the story of his father. It was his dad's memoir, basically, and his dad passed away a few years ago now. And while his dad was still alive, one of the things that he had been after his dad was to write a book and things like that. So he got actually a professional writer involved, and it turned out to be just a fantastic finished product. And so I think that there are lots of stories like that. And so my parents' involvement with FDF and what they did, I think, really helped create, drive and sustain FDF. But there are lots of parents and lots of people who were super heavily involved in their own ways or with their own communities, and FDF was just one of the ways that they had the ability to really showcase or to utilize their talents, and that kind of a thing. And along the ways we created, I think we mentioned this before, the FDF Hall of Fame, and the idea there was, it's not just the people on the board of trustees who everybody knew was involved every year, or my parents that everybody knew was involved every year, but there's lots and lots of unsung and some sung
Sure.
heroes out there who yayas who were making costumes every year, and priests who were just super supportive of their kids and what their efforts were and things like that. And so and like I said, I think that a film about FDF would capture that essence, whether you get, you obviously can't get everybody's story and things like that, but it would capture that essence, and certainly I think it would be remiss if it didn't highlight or capture that that part of the story from my family's perspective, just because of their intimate involvement with it for so many years. So yeah. In hindsight, I firmly believe now that probably the festival would not have lasted as long as it has if it didn't involve the younger generation really having a hand in it, because then from very early on they owned it. It was their function. It was something they were doing. It was something they could be proud of, and all of that good stuff. But the other interesting thing is I think kids will tend to be involved with something for longer potentially than adults do. And I have no statistical analysis to prove that, but I just think that adults, parents, you have kids, you have things going on in your life, you have jobs and whatever, the natural sort of progression of things is, parents that are really heavily involved with PTA or Little League or things like that aren't involved with it for 30 years. They're involved with it for the 5 or 6 years that their kids are involved with it,
Right.
And so, I think you probably would have ended up with some sort of similar kind of evolution with FDF. If it had started and was just run by a group of adults, eventually they would have gotten burned out. Or when their kids ran their course, then
Yeah, no, you would have
And-
one of the 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly right. It's exactly right. And so So I think that the fact that there's been involvement with a lot of young people who have then wanted to stay involved for a long period of time has really contributed to the long-term success and proliferance of the program. Certainly more than me, I think my dad is much more of a visionary on the long front. I mean, from very, very early on when it was a little thing, he would always talk about, I don't remember what it was, you have to ask him about this, but he saw a similar kind of a thing. It was like a folk dance competition, but it was cloggers.
In the Rose Bowl?
Yeah, in the Rose
That-
Bowl.
yeah,
And he was
Mormons.
talking about, the Mormon kids doing clogging in the Rose Bowl and things like that. And he thought, this is fantastic. So from very early on, he thought, 100,000 seat, arena, kids performing, this whole thing. And he very much, that's kind of always been his, and so he's a visionary in terms of he has the ability to look at things and see what they can be rather than what they are, and that's a gift for sure. Because a lot of people don't have that ability, and so so yes, from that standpoint for sure. And then with respect to specifically, did he intend it to be a leadership training thing and whatnot? I think that some of that developed a little bit more specifically as it went on, but he very much had intended for it to be a youth involved, a youth-run thing from the get-go, because the very first one was put on by the St. Spiridon Junior Parish Council, which was a group of kids. They were probably, I don't remember how old you had to be on the Junior Parish Council, but I think you had to be like 15 to 18 or something like that, and they were the group that put on the first thing. It was kind of their idea. They wanted to do something like this and have it be more than just St. Spiridon. They wanted to involve other churches. They wanted to have an opportunity to meet some of the other kids, and so that's kind of what ultimately they all came up with. And so my dad was their advisor, and this is what they all came up with, and so and from that grew FDF. So I know that he very much had intended for it to always be an event. Probably more so, if anything, if I had to guess, it evolved the other way. I think it was kind of intended to be an event for the youth, put on by the youth, and it became an event for everybody, put on by the youth.